Hello and welcome to Sincerely Elvis Presley. I'm Sean. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to tune in. I really appreciate it. Hope you like the new blingy hat. It's very, very blingy indeed. I mean, I'm not sure I can carry off bling at 58, pushing 59, but I'll do my best. Right then, 1963. It's tempting to think of 63 as the year of the album that never was. And in many ways, that characterises 1963 in my mind more than anything else. But there's one thing that's happening around this time that I think there's a common misconception that in 61, Elvis had appeared at 2 benefit performances, walked off the stage, and there were no plans whatsoever for him to tour. But actually that's not the case, and towards the end of 1962, this is a little paragraph taken from one of the entries in the Elvis Day by Day book by Peter Guralnick and Ernst Jorgensen. And it says, and this is relating to November 1962, in combination with RCA, the Colonel had been working on a giant 43-city tour, which he billed as the biggest tour ever, and for which RCA as a promoter would guarantee Elvis more than $1 million. RCA, however, got cold feet, proposing that the tour be scaled back to 11 dates only, and the Colonel, who believed firmly in the grand gesture, declined, and it didn't happen. So that's interesting. You know, this perception that all the Colonel wanted was Elvis to appear in movies and not tour, not appear in front of audiences, seems to have been a bit of a myth, because you can see there that actually he was negotiating for it to happen. And if RCA had have, bankrolled it, I think he'd have gone with it by all accounts. The only reason he pulled out is because he wanted it to be the biggest tour ever. So it isn't as if, this perception, that's it, all he wants is Elvis in the movies and nothing else. That doesn't seem strictly true, actually. So, I think it will be interesting later on this year when we see Peter Guralnick's book on Elvis and the Colonel and see what light that sheds, because apparently he's going to show a relationship different to the common perceived one. And, I just found that fascinating, and I probably should have mentioned it at the end of the 62 episode. But, there was still a desire to put Elvis on stage in front of people. So yeah, I think that's fascinating. But anyway, let's look at 63. So 63, right at the beginning, Elvis is in the studio recording the soundtrack for Fun in Acapulco. Yet another set in a glossy location, a scenic location, colourful, etc., etc., etc. More of the same. This is now, the die is now cast. Other than the possible sort of sidestep of Viva Las Vegas that's filmed in 63, that treadmill's started now. That blueprint has been set, and that will carry on to diminishing returns throughout the next few years. Sad but true. So anyway, in the Fun in Acapulco, the filming's already been started for that, and that's as I say, let's not dwell on that. The die is cast, and I don't say it's a bad film, but just the trajectory is set. But in April, the soundtrack to It Happened at the World's Fair is released, and It Happened at the World's Fair opens in the cinema. So worth having a quick look at It Happened at the World's Fair. There's your Blu-ray, can't go wrong. Beautiful, beautiful cleaned up transfer. Fantastic. Still a great movie, still stands up in its own right. Obviously, we know it's famous for the young Kurt Russell kicking Elvis in the shins in it. And he obviously later go on to, portray Elvis in the movie in 1979, yada, yada, yada. I think everyone's heard that story to death. But not a bad movie at all. And the soundtrack itself wasn't bad. So here's an original press. Very colourful sleeve indeed. Now let's have a look at our songs. So where do we fall down, in my opinion? I would say How Would You Like to Be? Very nursery rhyme-ish. You know, again, got Elvis singing to a kid. I mean, the whole film is centred around his relationship with the kid. But, you know, I still think it stands up as a reasonably strong soundtrack. I would say the single One Broken Heart for Sale, what I could never understand is why we got the short version, you know, where the movie version had an extra verse. I mean, this is a ridiculously short song. You know, could at least fill it out and give us that extra verse on the soundtrack album and as the single. But we got is it about a minute and a half or something? It's a ludicrously short single, which is a real shame because it's a fantastic song. You know, I wish it was way, way longer. But yeah, we've got Relax, which is kind of, I think that's Fever, you know, Redux. It's like a revisit. It really does feel like Fever to me, that one. But, you know, Beyond the Bends, nice and breezy. They Remind Me Too Much of You is a beautiful love song. I'll never forget hearing, you know, one of the first outtakes I overheard on the silver box of They Remind Me Too Much of You. I'm Falling in Love Tonight's beautiful. Yeah, Cotton Candy Land, it's okay. World of Our Own, Happy. And there's a couple of lightweight songs, but How Would You Like to Be, I think, is the weakest one. And, you know, it's still, I guess, does it stand up outside of the context of the film? I'm not entirely sure that it does, but you know, it's not terrible. It's not terrible. I'd say it's still a reasonably strong soundtrack. Elvis, the cover, he looks fantastic. And interesting, really, because when you look at that's the original UK release. Now I've got this. Is this a doll press? I think it is a doll press of it, public domain press. And actually, his face looks less saturated on the later release. It looks more natural looking. But reasonably accurate reproduction of the cover, and the back sleeve is pretty much an accurate reproduction of the original as well. And doll presses usually come, yeah, we've got a nice orange release there. And then the other version I have on vinyl of the It Happened at the World's Fair soundtrack is the reasonably recent VPI release, and that was on the splatter vinyl. I don't know if it's that in the original splatter vinyl. And you do get a nice little booklet with this. Lots of alternate takes. So that's a really nice little release. Just give you a quick flick through the booklet, although I may well have shown this before. But really nice. Of course, that's the French title. I think the last time I showed this, I butchered the language. Apologies to any French viewers. I'm not going to butcher it again. I'll let you read it for yourselves and decide how to pronounce it. You don't need me fluffing and stumbling all over it, I assure you. Oh look, there we get Kurt Russell. It's that interesting little factoid, but I think it's been done to death, that one, isn't it? Oh yeah, Kurt Russell, yeah, he kicks Elvis. Yep, we know. Yeah, fantastic little booklet, really nicely put together little release this. Super recommended. I think you can still pick this up, which when it says limited to 1,500 copies, I mean, I still see them going sealed and new, so I don't think it's sold in huge numbers. So there's It Happened at the World's Fair. Now this is where things go a little bit awry for me and for many. In May, Elvis goes back into Studio B in Nashville, 26th, 27th, 28th, his usual overnight sessions, and he throws down 14 masters. Now, in his head, I'm sure he must have been thinking, you know, there's the next studio album, and there's some cracking tunes. Devil in Disguise, Witchcraft, Memphis, Tennessee, the first version of Memphis, Tennessee, which he would, Chuck Berry's Memphis, Tennessee, which he'd later revisit the following year, because obviously it seems he wasn't entirely happy with the first recording. Please Don't Drag That String Around. There's some great material put down at those sessions that would have made a great studio album. But as we know, it wasn't to be. Why wasn't it to be? Well, it was Parker. That's my reading of it. That's what I've seen of it. Parker realised that the soundtracks were the ones that were selling, and the studio albums had not been selling in the kind of numbers that the soundtrack albums had been selling in. Elvis's Back hadn't, Something for Everybody hadn't, and Potluck hadn't got anywhere near to the sales of, for instance, Blue Hawaii. And Parker, the Colonel, was always about money. So what happened was, rather than get the studio album that the world should have seen, we got Golden Records Volume 3. Because that was the thing. Ka-ching, that was an album that would make the money, because that had all the singles on it, so people would buy that. That would sell in big numbers. That will give us a big selling album. And that was the kind of put a paid to the end of the studio album that could have easily been created from the material at those sessions, but it just didn't happen. So Golden Record, don't get me wrong, Gold Records Volume 3 is fantastic. A brilliant album. Just ask Mark on Mark's Elvis for Everyone channel, because he loves this one. And I love it too. Gold Records Volume 3. There's an original press of Gold Records Volume 3. And just look at the quality of the material. You know, It's Now or Never, Stuck on You, Fame and Fortune, I Gotta Know, Surrender, I Feel So Bad, Are You Lonesome Tonight, Marie's the Name, His Latest Flame, Little Sister, Good Luck Charm, Anything That's Part of You, She's Not You. I mean, it is a phenomenal playlist. But, unfortunately, it was at the expense of a new studio album. And that, the implications of that for Elvis's career were quite significant, because he really needed to be putting stuff out that just wasn't solely soundtrack material. But this strategy of the Colonel signalled the end of that until 69. As I said before, 67 we get How Great Thou Art, but you know, that's not a standard pop studio album, so you kind of discount that in some ways, and that's not belittling it, because it's a fantastic album, but I think you know what I mean. I've got this press as well. This is when the Canadian presses, just after, not long after Elvis passed, put out quite a lot of his material on collector's gold vinyl. So this is this sticks to the American sleeve layout, whereas the UK one looked like this. This is the American layout, and this was gold vinyl with I think it had the inner sleeve that kind of looked like the US inner sleeves as well. The albums on there. So that's your Canadian gold press. But let's look a little bit at the album that never was, because you know, it's one of those great, it never happened, but boy, it should have done. And over the years, you know, the official record company has realised their mistake and tried to go some way to redress that with the releases. So the first iteration we had of that, and I'll show you the vinyl first, is when this came out, and this was 1990. So we got an approximation of the album that never was. Elvis Presley For the Asking, the Lost Album. This vinyl release is reasonably hard to get hold of now. You can still pick it up, but it was one of those that wasn't produced, you know, coming out in 1990. vinyl production was on the decrease, so this wasn't produced in massive numbers, so it is a little bit harder to get hold of than some titles. I think it's on the RCA Black, later Black label, though it was a kind of repro of the original logo. And your track listing is just Long Lonely Highway, Western Union, Witchcraft, Love Me Tonight, What Now, What Next, Where To, Please Don't Drag That String Around, Blue River, Never Ending, Devil in Disguise, Finders Keepers, Losers Weepers, Echoes of Love, Slowly But Surely, It Hurts Me, Memphis, Tennessee, and Ask Me. A great track list and a great kind of album that never was, sadly. So when this came out, we had the vinyl, we had the CD release. Now this is interesting. This is the one that came out in the UK, sticking very closely to that concept of trying to produce an album sleeve of maybe what it would have been at the time. By the look of Elvis's hair, I'm on his hair again, that's probably around the Kissing Cousins time, I would say. So when was Kissing Cousins filmed? Yeah, that was around about this time, wasn't it? It was filmed in September, October, location filming in October. So yeah, around about this. It's a reasonably contemporary of the time 1963 photograph for the cover there. I don't think we get, yeah, there's nothing worth speaking of in the booklet really, just probably just the track list if I remember rightly. Well, that's your lot, pretty bare bones. So this was the UK approach, which kind of makes sense. Our US cousins went with that, which to me makes less sense. I'm not really sure what the thinking was. There was also a long box version of this released as well. But it's kind of, I suppose I can kind of get, they've gone for sort of keep it under wraps, or this has just been found, it's the lost album kind of thing. But, and weirdly, this was the version I wanted at the time. You know, I imported this from the States at the time, and when I started collecting again a couple of years back and replacing everything, this was the first version I wanted, because in my head, but I've kind of, as time has gone on, I've kind of thought, yeah, I'm not really a fan of that anymore. I mean, I don't even think, did we get, you got nothing, I'm not sure if that's an original or if that was a black inner, but yeah, nothing there. And I don't really think, you got, so yeah, I mean, it's an interesting approach, but as I say, as time's gone on, I've come to appreciate this approach way more than the lost album approach. I get that what that was doing, but now, not only have we had that album, but we've also been treated to the Devil in Disguise sessions, so the lost album sessions. So we get the entire sessions, and we even get the January 1964 sessions when Memphis, Tennessee is redone, which is interesting really, isn't it? Because that song obviously meant a lot to Elvis. He adored Memphis, so to have a song that talks about it, he obviously wanted to get that right and wasn't happy with the first version. So this is the lost album sessions, Elvis Presley, Devil in Disguise. What can I tell you that I haven't already told you about session releases? They are fantastic. The sound's fantastic. The material's fantastic. The presentation's fantastic. They are top notch. Give you a quick whistle stop tour. As usual, tape boxes inside, and your CDs sitting with different coloured RCA labels, and as ever, a superb top-notch booklet some contemporary photographs. That looks like a Viva Las Vegas session photograph to me. I would say it's because I recognise how Elvis's hair looks, but you're sick of me going on about his hair, but it's true. There's the shot of Elvis on his motorcycle. This is the ill-fated, I think what was this? The USS Potomac. Yeah, that was a bit of a disastrous attempt. I'm sure if you don't know the story of Elvis and the US Potomac, Google it. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So that or Potomac, but it sounds better as Potomac. Google that and have a read of the story of that. And it was a bit of a debacle, as it turned out, unfortunately. Yeah, during the press conference, USS Potomac press conference, February the 14th, 1964. So, you know, they've put the kind of release of the Lost album into 64, and they've used the material that was recorded in early 64 as well. But the number of masters that were recorded in 63 suggests to me that the album should have been released in 63, and everything that I've read says that it's Parker's insistence on Gold Records Volume 3 that sort of put a kibosh on that plan. So yeah, so we get all this fantastic material, but most of it just gets eked out over time as bonus tracks on soundtracks and B-sides of singles and what have you. And it's kind of wasted, really. It's not put together as the coherent whole that it should have been. Now, the other release that celebrates that material. Now, I don't have very many FTD vinyls. In fact, I have about half a dozen, I think, in total. But this is one that I do have, and this is Elvis Sings Memphis, Tennessee. And this almost takes the Lost album approach and puts together that material with outtakes and what have you. And this is a beautiful release. I couldn't resist this one. This one came up at a really nice price compared, I think I paid, if I remember rightly, this one was about £56 for a double FTD vinyl. And that's, that's the sort of thing that's going to tempt me, because that's not someone just, it's FTD vinyl, let's charge £300 for it. Now, I know this probably isn't one of the ones that command the huge amounts that something like Standing Room Only or the Jungle Room Sessions command, but even so, I've seen people selling this at the 150 plus. So I didn't think 50 odd was too bad. And that's what they were really the only FTD vinyls I've ever picked up, is when I thought, do you know what, they're worth that. That's not that I'm saying that the others aren't worth. Well, I don't think things are worth £300, £400, £500 for a vinyl album. No, I don't. Not unless you've got a mint, pristine condition pressing of the first album or the second album. Yeah, fair enough, genuine stuff. But I just don't think vinyl's worth £300, £400, £500. Not for this sort of stuff. So that's why I don't have much of it. But I digress. There's another kind of stab at that Lost album material from 63, possibly into 64. Is some of this? Yeah. So yeah, they've kind of pushed the timeline out a bit, but to me, the Lost album and the Lost Opportunity was 1963, and that's when that material should have come out, and it didn't. So that was unfortunate. But anyway, we missed that opportunity. Gold Records comes out in August. In July, Elvis is already recording the soundtrack and filming the magnificent Viva Las Vegas. And then, as I said, in September and into October and November, he starts filming and recording Kissing Cousins. A significant event happens in October. On the 17th, he gets his black belt 2nd degree in karate. But yeah, it's other than those recording sessions that take place early on in May, it's very much Hollywood movies, and that's now what Elvis will lock himself into, unfortunately, for 63, 64, 65, 66. That's rinse and repeat. You know, no more studio material, no more studio albums. That's the way it was going to go. But as we end 1963, it's worth having a little look at Fun in Acapulco. You know, we end 62 into 63 in the cinemas. Girls, 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 Sun, Sea and Sand, Exotic Locale. And we end 63 virtually in the same kind of way with Fun in Acapulco. So the soundtrack and the movie come out before the end of the year, so it's worth having a look at them in 63. So I do have a digital copy in HD of Fun in Acapulco through Amazon Prime. It's not the best quality, but it's better than DVD. But let's have a look at the soundtrack album, because again, this is another movie that I think still has strong material, still quality soundtrack material. Fun in Acapulco, there's some great songs on here. Is there anything that's not No Room to Rumble in a Sports Car is a bit silly and throwaway, and probably doesn't stand up that well outside of the context of the movie. And The Bullfighter Was a Lady is a little bit fluffy, I think, for my taste. But, you know, some still genuine Bossa Nova Baby, you know, you're still getting soundtrack albums that produce cracking singles that, you know, fantastically stand up on their own in spades. And you've got beautiful material on here. You know, you can't say no in Acapulco. I think I'm going to like it here. El Toro, Margarita. There's some great Guadalajara, the vocals on Guadalajara. You know, there's still some great material going on in the soundtracks. And I think, you know, I think it's telling that we're already bringing in some of the material from those sessions. Look, Love Me Tonight and Slowly But Surely, from those abandoned album, you know, the album that was abandoned, we're getting some of the extra material put as bonus songs. I think, if I'm right, this is probably the first album that has bonus songs on it. Yeah, I think it is. And you know, for some albums, you'd get a considerable amount of bonus material on there because the actual soundtracks themselves were so short. But what do we think of that as a cover? I've always been in sort of two minds about that. I know it's lovely and colourful, and that sort of rug sort of gives that feel of you know, the locale and the scenery of the film. But I never really liked the way they kind of squashed Elvis's head right down to the bottom of the sleeve, like he's sort of, you know, he's sort of disappearing down the bottom there. And it always struck me, you know, we get to 1966, and when Paradise Hawaiian Styles released, for some reason RCA didn't feel that Elvis looked, you know, the photographs of him around the time looked good enough for his album cover, which I think is ridiculous, frankly. So they went with the Fun in Acapulco shot. And I've always thought to myself, what if in 63, for the Fun in Acapulco cover, they'd have used the cover that ended up being Paradise Hawaiian Style? So I've kind of reclaimed it, and I've used the font and logos that came from this, but with what became Paradise Hawaiian Style. So that's my go at what this album might have looked like you know, had they used that at the time? Let me know what you think. It's just a bit of silliness, but I don't know, you know, I think it kind of works. I feel like I'm reclaiming it from the dastardly deed they did by not using a proper shot from Paradise of Wine style, because I think that was insulting, frankly, to Elvis. So I've reclaimed it back, and I've also, you know, saved poor Elvis from being squashed down the bottom of the sleeve. But nevertheless, you know, great back sleeve, great shots there. Although there was always this sense that the UK covers that had to go with this big white border ended up like chopping off Elvis's head. I mean, the top of his head's gone there, the top of his head's gone there, and virtually we're only left with his chin there. So that was a bit unfortunate. But yeah, you know, I think a great, strong soundtrack album. And I have a dole press. The dole press at least saves Elvis's head and it's not cut off, so we get his full head there and not just his chin. They have oversaturated some of the photographs a little bit, and being a dole press, we get a very nice green vinyl. So Fun in Acapulco, last thing really I have to say about Fun in Acapulco is that we also got sessions of that. Again, one of the early session releases, so rather disappointing cover. I get the theme, but would have been nice with something. Hey, they could have used my cover. But yeah, we get lots of takes of all the material from Fun in Acapulco, and it is solely Fun in Acapulco. We don't get anything else. Nope. So we get our tape boxes, and this was when they were going with this rather daft idea of having them slotted in, which was a nightmare to get out. So I'm really glad they went with a sort of top slot that they went with later. So, you know, definitely see that they improved designs and certainly improved covers as time went on. But usual quality booklet, beautiful quality booklet, packed with great photographs and information. Elvis looking fantastic. Session data, shots from the movie. That, if I'm not mistaken, is probably El Toro. Bossa Nova Baby, where Elvis showed he could still move with the best of them. Of course, there was some dodgy shots in this of the body double stand-in in certain, because I think if I remember reading rightly, Elvis couldn't shoot in location on Mexico, so he was banned from Mexico because one of his movies had caused riots there, and I can't remember which movie it was. Somebody let me know in the comments, or I'll put it on if I find out. But yeah, he was banned from Mexico, so he couldn't go there to do location shooting. So there was either, like when he was on the bike with Raul, you know, that's green screen superimposed, but there was lots of distance shots where it clearly wasn't Elvis, it was a stand-in with a wig, and the, you know, the superimposing when he's doing the cliff dive is very much of its time, shall we say. But who doesn't love Fun in Acapulco? It's a great fun movie. As I say, still with a strong soundtrack, I think. Let me know in the comments what you think. But yeah, more of these session releases, please. Everything you've got, because they are fabulous. Fun in Acapulco. So there's 1963. Elvis leaves 1963, and in 1964, in the United States, the British invasion would arrive in earnest. And was Elvis prepared for it? Was he at the, you know, recording material of superb quality and and starring in fantastic movies that flexed his acting muscle. No, he wasn't, unfortunately. He just wasn't prepared to be at the top of his game to meet that British invasion head on and show who was the king. So he would end up, unfortunately, as far as the perception of the world was concerned, eclipsed by it a little bit, because by 64 he's just making movies and just releasing soundtrack albums, which, you know, unfortunately didn't cut the mustard as far as the public as large as was concerned. But 63, you know, there's some strong stuff out in 63. Not all of it obviously saw the light of day in 63. We had to wait some considerable time to see it as it should have been seen. But, you know, the movies are still reasonably strong. The soundtracks are still reasonably strong. You know, and Elvis still is Elvis, and he'll always be fantastic. But I think it's a year of a really big missed opportunity, and unfortunately a year that the treadmill really starts to ramp up in terms of those Hollywood movies, to the detriment of everything else. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Next time, I think I'm going to sort of step aside a little bit. We're going into 1964, but we're going to talk about a movie that was filmed and a soundtrack that was recorded in 63, and that is the magnificent Viva Las Vegas. So next time, I'm going to focus solely on Viva Las Vegas, which came out to cinema audiences in 1964. So I hope you're able to join me for that. Until then, take care of yourselves. Ta-da.
We'll meet you again. May God bless you. Adios.